How's it going, everyone? With the Pokemon World Championships now concluded, we wanted to go over the massive slate of move updates that we'll be seeing in the GBL. Typically, I do these after we've seen all the energy and effect values that Niantic doesn't advertise, but with the sheer scope of this update, we wanted to put out an early analysis and impressions video. This will be a more unscripted approach as we go through each move, but let's get right into things. Now, before we get to the actual move updates, there's actually the changes to the switch timer, where they'll be testing it at 50 seconds in the new season, down from 60. And we've seen them try 30 seconds before, which is a bit chaotic, but I think 50 seconds will be a very nice compromise. Not only will it make it so you won't sit in bad matchups as long, but it'll also shift the focus away from debuffing your opponent. Moves like Scald, Icy Wind, Sandsear's Storm, and Psychic Fangs will all be slightly less effective, seeing that the opposing trainer can now switch out of the debuff sooner. Plus, you also have the opposite, where self-debuffing moves can be a little more effective, like Wild Charge and Close Combat, Brave Bird, and more. I'm pretty happy to see them testing this change, but we'll see how it goes and if they choose to keep the timer like that. But now, let's take a look at the move updates specifically. So starting off here, we have a Rock Slide nerf. Now, this nerf is going to be a pretty significant one, not because it's a move that we've seen a lot over the past few seasons, but it is a move that has a lot of collateral. So being nerfed from 75 power to 65 power will affect a few prominent Pokemon. I'd say the biggest one we have here is Vigoroth, and we'll talk a little bit more about the other moves that are being nerfed on Vigoroth, but it's kind of gone now. Alongside that, you'll have the Galarian Stunfisk, and Galarian Stunfisk has seen a lot of nerfs over the past few seasons with new water types coming into the meta, but also just things like Earthquake being nerfed, which was its big source of power. Now Rock Slide being nerfed as well will also affect it in a really negative way. There will be a few Pokemon like Deoxys and Machamp and Melmetal who will all still have alternative moves that they can use, and they likely won't use Rock Slide anymore. And there are others who don't really have alternatives, good ones, so I think they'll be affected by this, but they're not the most meta Pokemon like Dunsparce and Cradily and Excadrill, though we will be talking about Dunsparce a little bit later. Up next, we have the Wing Attack nerf. Now, this Wing Attack nerf will have it going most likely back to where it was before at 7 energy, which is a Sucker Punch clone, or at least prior to this update. And this will be nerfing most of the flying types in the meta. You'll have things like Mantine, Pelipper, Gligar especially, and Golbat. All these Pokemon will be a bit slower. You might see Mantine specifically going back to Bullet Seed to get a little better energy gain, and possibly the same with Gligar going for Fury Cutter instead of Wing Attack. So it'll definitely help fighting types. But yeah, this will be a steep blow to a lot of flying types, but a lot of Pokemon who do use these will actually get other moves, like Galarian Moltres is one who we'll talk about a little bit later, but that'll be really big for the meta just because Gligar and Mantine especially have been really big both in the Great League and various cups. But moving on, we have probably one of the biggest nerfs, one that some people have been asking for, others have been hesitant toward it. I've been pretty hesitant, but that is an energy generation decrease to counter. Now, most likely, I would guess they're just shaving 1 energy off it, and that'll put it more in line with moves like Dragon Breath and Gust and Confusion, just a 2-turn version of it. And if that's true, the move will still be pretty good, but it's no longer going to be one of the best moves in the game, and that'll hurt a lot of fighting types. Now, many of them will still be pretty good, but now you're not going to have, the overwhelming counter meta, with things like Annihilate, Poliwrath, and obviously Vigoroth, who we talked about before. None of them will be top meta picks anymore. And Vigoroth obviously won't be threatening all the different limited formats with Counter and Rock Slide being nerfed, and we'll also talk about Body Slam a little bit later. But, a lot of these Pokemon won't be threatening the meta anymore. But this does mean that Force Palm will be much more viable on Lucario versus Counter, contrary to what we said in the analysis a few weeks back. But we will be talking a little bit more about Force Palm a little bit later. But You also have Pokemon like Deoxys, Scrafty, and Obstagoon, all of which will be hurt by this, and some kind of fringe spicy meta picks likely won't see much use anymore, like Haxorus, Pessimian, and Surfetch'd, and even Heracross. Unfortunately, this will hurt a lot of their usage, and I don't really think they'll see much use anymore outside of really, really niche use. But coming up next is Dig, and Dig is having its power nerfed, we know, directly from 80 power down to 70. This move is really just targeting Gligar. Obviously you have Wing Attack that's nerfing it as well, but with Dig being nerfed to 70 power, it's now a pretty underwhelming move, seeing that it's 50 energy. 50 energy for 70 power is not very good, and so that's going to be a pretty steep blow to Gligar. I don't really think you'll see it that much outside of niche scenarios. That's unfortunate because I do like the Pokemon, but it was really overwhelming in certain metas, the Great League, and especially Great League Remix when it dodged the ban. Next up is something that we had in our predictions, our hopes video the other week, and that is a Parabolic Charge buff, which I'm really excited to see. It's being buffed a little bit different to what I was suggesting. In that video, I was saying just lower its energy to 45 and give it a guaranteed defense buff, and they're doing something similar to that where they're decreasing the energy. We don't really know how much it's going to be, but they're also increasing the power to 70, and they're just making the defense increase just a chance to happen, which actually I think is the better move. It's smarter than making it a guaranteed buff. So I think it'll probably go down to about 50 energy if I were to guess, or at least the hope is 50 energy. 55 would be kind of eh. But yeah, bring it down to 50 energy with 70 power and a chance to increase the user's defense. Not anything spectacular, but that would be a pretty good move. And obviously it's going to help Dedenne the most, seeing that Dedenne has a pretty good moveset and its typing is unique as an electric fairy type. So I think that would be great for it. To a lesser extent, you'll have Heliolisk and Bellibolt benefiting from this move, but obviously Dedenne is the big one. Next up, we have Body Slam being nerfed to 50 power. Now, this move is still pretty good, but it's no longer, really good at 35 energy and 60 power. At 50 power, it matches moves like Aqua Tail before that move was buffed a season or two back. But this is going to affect a lot of Pokemon. This move is obviously the final nail in the coffin being nerfed for Vigoroth. It's still got pretty good bulk and counter Body Slam. Both of those are still good moves, they're just not great anymore. And Rock Slide being nerfed is kind of the nail in the coffin, so to speak. So other Pokemon who this will affect will be Greedent, obviously really spammy and bulky, so it'll be great to have this move it'll still be just as spammy. Well, we'll talk about that a little later, but it being 50 power means it won't be as oppressive, which is nice. Similar with Double wasn't really a broken Pokemon, so it's a little more disappointing for it. And it'll also affect Pokemon like Avalugg and Zweilous and Snorlax, which is a little more disappointing as I don't really think any of those were broken, but unfortunately they'll be, nerfed by this. But kind of taking Body Slam's place is Swift, which is getting its energy cost decreased to 35 energy. Now, it'll be more of a clone of Weather Ball normal, at 55 power versus Body Slam 60, but that's still a good move. So now you'll see some Pokemon running this move because it's so cheap. The big three, I think, Clefable will be the big one just because it has Fairy Wind, so it'll be spamming this move a lot more, and that move's also getting a buff, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But Clefable is going to be huge in the meta, the Great League and the Ultra League specifically, but also Wigglytuff, I think, will enjoy this move. I think having something cheap alongside Icy Wind will be great, especially as a Charm user. You want to get those moves out as fast as you can, so Wigglytuff will see a buff with this, and I don't think many people will be that excited about that. And also Uxie is a small call out. I don't think it'll be that good, but a cheaper move will be nice for it. Up next, though, is a Mudshot rework. Now, I would say it's mostly a nerf, but they're adding 1 power to it to put it at 4 power, and they're decreasing the energy generation. Presumably, this will match moves like Fury Cutter, at least a 2-turn version of it, and obviously Sand Attack. It's where Spark was before they made any changes to it, maybe a year or so ago. Now this is going to affect a lot of Pokemon. All of the water ground type, the Mud Boys, they're all going to be much less spammy. Swampert, Whiscash, Quagsire, and this is going to affect a lot of them. I think most negatively, Quagsire might be able to survive it just because it's really spammy with Aqua Tail still, but it's going to hurt a lot of Pokemon. And you also have Greedent, who we just talked about with Body Slam. It's, I think, not gone. You'll still see people using it. It's not nearly going to be as good as it was. And also the legendaries in the Master League, Groudon and Landorus. Now for Groudon, I think this is going to be really unfortunate because it really wants to get to that Precipice Blades. And so this will make it slower, but you'll give it a little more power, I guess, which could help with farm down potential. And Landorus, I know a lot of people were asking for Sandsear Storm to be nerfed, and we're not seeing that, but Mudshot being nerfed will make it less spammy, which I think is pretty healthy for the game, even though I use Landorus myself. So I don't think it's a total loss, but I think Landorus will definitely still be hurt by this. Another legendary seeing a nerf is Cresselia, because Future Sight is going down to 110 power, and that's almost purely for Cresselia. I think it's really good in the Ultra League. It mainly runs Grass Knot and Moonblast anyway, but I have seen Future Sight used mainly to hit fire types, people who run Charizard or Skeledirge. Some will run Future Sight, so you get a stronger stab move that's neutral toward these Pokemon. So this is, you still have that option here, but they're making Future Sight a little less powerful to kind of avoid it being, having coverage for all these different Pokemon. So I think that's a pretty good change. Next up is a Fire Spin buff. Now, this is kind of the beginning of something that I'm really excited for, and the big one is Alolan Marowak. Now, this is a Pokemon I really enjoy. I have a Shadow Shiny, and I've run it before, and we'll talk about Bone Club later, which is a really underwhelming move, but Fire Spin getting a little more power is just going to help it even more. Also is Charizard, who with Wing Attack nerfed and Fire Spin buffed, I think it'll go back to running Fire Spin as it did a while back. There might be a few scenarios where you'd want, Dragon Breath or Wing Attack, but I think Fire Spin will be the move going forward that you really want. So that'll be pretty good. And also a little buff to Solgaleo, who's already really good, but now it'll be even more powerful in the Master League. Next up is a Steel Wing nerf. Now, I think this is mostly to nerf Skarmory, who was a little too spammy. I thought it was pretty good where it was in the meta, but I can understand why they're wanting to decrease its energy generation. I don't think it's going back to where it was. I think they're just taking away one energy, which will make it an Ember clone, which is still respectable, and it's better than Air Slash ever was, so I think Skarmory will have some use, but it's not going to be as powerful as it once was, especially with Sky Attack getting nerfed, which we'll talk about. This will also affect Empoleon, unfortunately, where it won't be as spammy, but speaking of Empoleon, Metal Claw is actually seeing a buff, where its energy generation is being increased. This will actually kind of make up for the Steel Wing nerf. Empoleon will get that energy generation back. Metal Claw currently generates 6 energy and Steel Wing currently does 7, so, Metal Claw's either going to match Steel Wing's 7 energy if they do +1, or if they do +2, it'll be even better. So Empoleon's kind of saved. It'll do a little less damage, but I think it'll be okay. Also, you'll have Alolan Sandslash, who I think will consider this move, depending on how much energy they give it at least. And same with Excadrill, it might prefer this to Mudshot. If it's +1, both will still prefer Mudshot and Shadow Claw. There's also a few other things like Genesect and Galarian Stunfisk, who might consider the move, depending on, again, energy. And Dialga, I don't think will give up Dragon Breath that often, but I could see, some people running it now just to deal with fairies. Probably won't be the preferred move, though, but an option. Up next, we have Trailblaze being buffed, another move that we wanted to be buffed in our predictions video. Its energy cost is just being decreased, which I do like a lot. It's something that we considered in the video, but we're a little wary of doing because of Greedent, but because they nerfed Greedent with Body Slam and the Mudshot, I think it'll be fine. So decreasing it presumably to 45 energy, 45 and 65 power is pretty good. I'd say that's actually a really above average move, and so that'll help a lot of Pokemon. A few who I think will benefit the most will be Berserker, maybe Sudowoodo, though it does have counter nerfed, Raichu in its Alolan form, Skuntank especially. That'll be really good cheap coverage for it. Also Oranguru, and to a lesser extent Greedent, obviously, but this is a great buff and I'm really happy to see it. A smaller one that we're seeing is a Zap Cannon nerf, where the chance to decrease the opponent's attack is decreasing, and we don't know how much this is yet, but I'm assuming it'll be 50%, which is kind of in line with the main series, I believe. But, you know, just a little way to rein in Registeel a bit more. Now, the next two nerfs are to address a pretty infamous team composition, you know, with Razor Leafers and Bastiodon usually. So up first we have Smackdown getting a nerf to its damage. This will obviously make Bastiodon less oppressive, which I think is a good idea. Though it'll also affect things like Tyranitar in the Master League and Crustle in some limited formats. A little unfortunate, but a necessary addition or a necessary nerf, I think. And up next is the Razor Leaf nerf, which obviously is going to affect Victory Bell or Shadow Victory Bell the most, so you'll have that kind of team not working as well. You can still try it, but it won't be anywhere near as reliable as it was. It'll also affect a few others like Kartana in some limited formats, and some little cup choices like Cottony whenever you would run Razor Leaf, so that'll be interesting. Next is an Astonish buff, yet again, and now it's crazy to see that Astonish has gone from a move that is completely trash to one that's pretty good but kind of average, and now it's getting a power buff from 9 all the way up to 12, which is pretty insane, making the move incredibly strong and respectable. And I think this will help a lot of Pokemon, but the ones that I specifically am keeping an eye on are Drifblim. You know, it's got some spammy, debuffy charge moves, and also Dusknoir, who is really bulky, has this move, and it'll see a few additions and some buffs as well, but you know, this will be really good for it. And a few others like Klefki and Shiinotic and maybe Mawile will also use this move just because it is so good now. Next up is Fairy Wind, which I was kind of surprised to see getting a buff, but not many Pokemon really used Fairy Wind, in limited formats certainly, but not really in the open league, so they're turning this, what was once a Mudshot clone, they're giving it one more power, which is actually really nice. The big one is obviously Clefable, who has the buffed Swift, but also Galarian Weezing, who already has really great coverage, and it'll be getting another buff of its own, which will help it a lot. But also you'll have Florges, who I think will excel in the Great League, and especially in the Master Premier, where, you know, you saw a lot of use for it anyways, but now having a little bit more power with Fairy Wind will be nice. And a few others like Jumpluff. You know, it's got the bulk of a Azumarill pretty much, and having a little more farm down potential with that more powerful Fairy Wind will help a lot. Now the next buff is yet another fast move buff, and it's actually Karate Chop getting an energy buff. It'll likely be getting one more, and that puts it to a really insane kind of status. It's essentially a pre-nerfed Mudshot or Psycho Cut or Fairy Wind with, you know, several extra damage, or 2 extra damage specifically, and that's extremely strong. Probably one of the best moves in the game. And there's 2 main Pokemon who I think this will benefit. One is Machamp. Obviously you'll have both the normal and the shadow form doing really well, but now it'll be trading some of that power from counter for much spammier moves, especially with Cross Chop being buffed this past season, I believe it was. And I think it'll also be able to lean into some of its more expensive charged moves. Obviously Rock Slide got nerfed, so I think it'll either run the Legacy Payback or Legacy Stone Edge, so I think that'll be really exciting. And I'll spoil an addition for later on. Pangoro is also getting this fast move. You know, Karate Chop isn't a move that many Pokemon learn, but Pangoro was one of the last ones who did get the move, who doesn't have it. And with that move, it becomes extremely good. I actually had one built for both the Great League and the Ultra League, and it was really tough to work. But now with Karate Chop, it can spam those moves much quicker, just like Machamp, and, you know, you'll be able to throw Night Slash and hopefully boost your attack, and obviously you've got Close Combat for a nuke move, so it'll be extremely good. Moving on with the fast move buffs, we've got a double buff to Mud Slap, where it'll be getting more power and more energy. It'll now have the same power and likely energy as Astonish. Astonish will be doing 10 energy and 12 power, and I do expect that'll be, you know, where Mudslap will fall. And this will affect a few Pokemon. Gastrodon will now be, you know, your top Mud Boy. It's kind of funny that all the Mud-shot Mud Boys will be kind of out of the meta, or at least less so, whereas Gastrodon will probably be the best one, even with Body Slam getting nerfed. You know, it's pretty bulky, good typing, and obviously this is a really top tier move now. But also you have Marowak and Golurk getting the move, and you know, Marowak is pretty bulky, you know, just like the Alolan form. It's just a mono ground type for this form, but with the Mud Slap buff and also the Bone Club buff, which we'll obviously talk about a little later, it'll be really good. And Golurk has a really stellar typing of Ground Ghost, which helps it resist a lot of key important Pokemon, like, your Machamps and whatnot. So that'll be really exciting. Poison Sting will also be receiving the same buff that Fairy Winds did, where it's getting 1 more power, moving it up to 4. And obviously that's nothing huge, but it really does help the Pokemon who get it. Like Clodsire is probably the big one. It's extremely bulky, it's got more bulk than Azumarill, I believe, and, a pretty unique typing in Ground Poison and great coverage with Stone Edge and Earthquake. So I do really think this will be one of the biggest Pokemon in the meta. And along with that, you've got some smaller ones who will see some nice, growth with this buff, like Drapion, Ariados, and even Quillfish. Moving on, we have the Psywave buff, and this really comes down to whether they're giving it 1 more energy or 2 more energy. With all these pretty drastic buffs, I like to think that it'll be +2, but who knows, we'll take a look at that when the move stats come out. If it does get 2 energy, I would say the biggest recipient of this move will be Malamar, who will probably trade Psycho Cut for this move just so it can have more fast move pressure. And to a lesser extent, Lunatone and Solrock, I think, will be pretty good. They have solid enough bulk, but their typing is a little iffy, but this move will definitely help them. Next up, we have a Rollout buff, speaking of rock types. And Rollout will be getting more power as well, similar to Poison Sting and Fairy Wind, but this is moving it all the way up to basically double kick with an extra energy. So pretty insane, one of the best moves in the game. That seems to be a common trend with a lot of these updates. And the big 3 here are all normal types. So first we've got Dunsparce, who will obviously see a little bit of nerfs with Rock Slide getting nerfed, and it's definitely going to want to run it for coverage, but I still think it'll use the move when it needs to. But Rollout getting this extra damage will do a lot of the heavy lifting with rock-type moves, and then obviously Drill Run is really powerful, so being able to spam that along with this extra power of Rollout is going to be really nice for it. And kind of the same idea with Miltank. Obviously Body Slam got nerfed for it, so not as good, but, still great bulk. And Licky Licky is another one, another spoiler. Licky Licky is going to be getting this move as a new addition, and it's kind of crazy that it's taking the place of Lickitung. Lickitung is bulkier in the Great League and requires a lot of XL, but Licky Licky is going to end up with the better moveset here, seeing that, once again, Body Slam is nerfed, but it'll be able to spam it much better, and Rollout's just a strong move now. Plus, having Shadow Ball as, a coverage move versus Lickitung's Power Whip is going to be really helpful. So, yeah, believe it or not, Licky Licky is going to overtake Lickitung, and it's obviously going to be great in the Ultra League as well. Now, the final fast move buff that we have here is Sucker Punch, and this is one that I asked for a lot, specifically in regards to Spiritomb, and it's one that I also predicted in our video. Now, Sucker Punch getting a buff, I was suggesting 1 energy to make it kind of a Powder Snow clone, but instead we're bumping the damage up massively. So instead it'll be a counter clone, or at least counter pre-nerf. And this will help a lot of Pokemon, because, having a dark type counter is going to set a lot of them apart. There's a lot of the funky normal type Pokemon, you'll have Furfrou and Spinda and Furret and Kecleon. All those Pokemon get Sucker Punch. So while I don't think many of them will be, super meta, this will definitely help a lot of them out. So you might see them appear in certain cups. Another one, after Wing Attack got nerfed, Galarian Moltres wasn't going to be as good. It's pretty bulky, but that was going to hurt it. But now it's got Sucker Punch, so it'll pretty much fill the role that it did before, but better, because Sucker Punch is now a much, much better move, so that'll be exciting for it. Spiritomb is going to see some more use, and it's also getting a move addition that we'll talk about, but it having a much stronger fast move is exciting. And then in the Master League, Yveltal will probably run this move over Snarl. Even though Snarl will have a little more energy generation, I think Sucker Punch being so much stronger, especially from Yveltal, which has a pretty good attack stat, that'll definitely cement it as, the new move for it. And I think Yveltal will be a top tier meta pick in the Master League. It'll be able to chip down Necrozma, obviously, but also other things like Dialga and Palkia, so that'll be really exciting. And up next, we're moving back to nerfs, where Sky Attack is receiving yet another nerf. Its energy is being decreased with really no power to kind of make up for it. So it's going to be even worse. I assume it'll go down from 50 energy to 55 anymore, and the move is, completely useless. But even at 55 energy, it's already really, really bad. So 55 energy, Skarmory will definitely fall out of favor more. I don't even know why you would use that move versus Flash Cannon, which is already pretty mediocre in itself. So I think Skarmory is mostly sunk with Sky Attack and Steel Wing nerfed. It'll probably just be Corviknight that replaces it at this point. And Lugia really can't catch a break in the Master League, where I think at this point it'll just run Aeroblast and probably Hydro Pump for double nukes, just because Sky Attack is so bad at this point. Speaking of Master League nerfs, we have Surf being reworked. We don't know the exact energy cost, but it is being raised, which is pretty unfortunate for many Pokemon, but it'll also be getting 10 more power from 65 to 75. Now, if this move goes up to 50 energy, I don't think it'll be used that often, but if it goes to 45 energy, then that's a pretty respectable move. That would match, Rock Slide as it is now before getting nerfed, which is a very solid move. So if that's the case, I think some Pokemon will make do with it, while others will be hurt a little bit as well. Kyogre in the Master League, Waterfall doesn't really generate that much energy, so that'll definitely make it slower, and I don't think it'll enjoy that. Tapu Fini will be a little slower, but having that extra power might be nice. And then Jellicent, Lantern, and the Slowbro family, Slowbro and Slowking in their Galarian forms, I don't think many of them will appreciate this. Maybe Jellicent, because it has a higher energy generating, fast move, but I think most of them won't like this. Now, moving back to buffs, we have Bone Club, which I mentioned earlier would be getting a buff, and this buff is going exactly the way we predicted for it to go, going up to 55 power, which is, a very respectable move, and this will help Marowak and Alolan Marowak a lot. Both of them are going to be meta threats now, especially with a Fire Spin buff for Alolan Marowak, and obviously Mudslap being really good for the Kanto Marowak, so yeah, both these Pokemon are ones to invest in, and I'm really excited. Next up, we have Brutal Swing getting a rework. Formerly, it was a Surf clone at 40 energy and 65 power, but now it's being lowered to 35 energy, but getting its power dialed back to 55, basically matching what Bone Club is now. And I think that's really good. Obviously, the extra power is still nice, but it being cheaper will definitely help Pokemon out. You'll have Tyranitar, Hydreigon, and Conkeldurr in the Master League. Having something cheaper will be appreciated by all of them, but the bigger recipients of it, I think, will be Galarian, Weezing, and Guzzlord in both the Great and Ultra Leagues, just because you'll have a lot more spamminess. Galarian Weezing gets the Fairy Wind buff as well, so both these will be really powerful contenders in both those lower leagues. Next up is a Nightshade buff, which is kind of a bad move. It's one of those moves that I kind of forget about, honestly. I believe it's 55 energy currently, and it has 60 power, and 60 power, and its energy is being lowered, and its power raised to 80. So I would assume with it being 55 now that they'll lower it to 80, making it, a clone of Dark Pulse and Dig, pre-nerf. Which is going to be very great. I don't really know that many who will be impacted by this, at least until we talk about the additions. But Noctowl does have this move, and I think it'll appreciate it, something a little bit cheaper, though with the Wing Attack nerf, and also the Sky Attack nerf, I don't necessarily think it's going to come back. But speaking of ghost types, we have a Power Gem buff. And the reason why I talk about ghost types is because Sableye. Now, this will also depend on, how much they're lowering the energy of the move. The power's getting bumped up to 85 and the energy is being decreased. Now, if they bring it to 55 energy, I think it'll be kind of, a mediocre move, usable but not great. But I think that might strike the perfect balance for Sableye specifically, at least, where it would use Power Gem or Return depending on your form, so I think that could be okay. If they bring it down to 50 energy though, then that's going to be really good. You'll have a move that's slightly better than Dark Pulse, stat-wise at least, and that'll definitely be preferred by Sableye outright, probably more so than Return. And also, if 50 energy might be good for Carbink, who's obviously got the nerfed Rock Slide. and it could also be really good for Vespiquen, who's seeing some buffs too. So overall, I'm curious to see where they place the energy for it. 55 energy might be a little healthier, but I think 50 could be really interesting. And for the final buff, we have a Shadow Punch buff, doing the same thing as Bone Club, essentially going up to 55 power. And now, there's 3 ghost families who I think will really enjoy this buff. Up first is Dusk Noir, and also Dusclops to a lesser extent, but Dusk Noir specifically, it's a little less bulky than Dusclops, but with the Astonish buff, which Dusclops doesn't have, I think this will go hand in hand really well. You'll have a top tier ghost fast move, and obviously a really strong ghost charged move in Shadow Punch, and then obviously you've got Shadow Ball for coverage, and you could also use Return in a purified form if you wanted, actual coverage that's not ghost, but that'll be exciting, and I think Dusknoir will be a top tier pick in both the Great and Ultra Leagues. And also Golurk, who's a little classier, but the ground and ghost type is really unique, and we obviously talked about the Mudslap buff. It actually gets Mudslap and Astonish, but I think with the moveset of Mudslap, the newly buffed Shadow Punch, and Dynamic Punch, it'll have a lot of coverage, ground, ghost, and fighting, 3 of the best typings, so that'll be really exciting for it. And also you have Hunter and Gengar, who, don't get too much, but extra power for Shadow Punch is still really good, especially when they have Shadow Claw for a fast move. Now we're moving over to the move additions. Now, some of these we've obviously talked about, so I'll skip over those as we get there. Up first is Counter Ledian. Now, Ledian getting counter is really exciting and something that I've wanted and many others have wanted just because it gets the move in the main series. But obviously counter got nerfed this season, so it's a bit of a monkey's paw, but I think it'll do reasonably well. It's not going to be something that's top tier with the move being so, nerfed a bit, but you might see it in limited formats, which will be nice. Next up is Volt Switch Fortress, and this will give it a lot better energy gain so it can reach moves like Earthquake a lot better. I don't know too much about Fortress, but I do expect this Pokemon to appear in limited formats more, which will be nice. And then we have Force Palm, the really good move that Lucario has, getting distributed to Breloom, Hariyama, and Mienshao. And Mienshao will also be getting the buffed Brutal Swing, who we'll talk about a little bit more. I don't really think this will do that much for many of these Pokemon. Hariyama and Breloom is really glassy, so I don't really see that much for it. And Hariyama does have a little more bulk, but I think it'll just be a worse Machamp, with the super OP Karate Chop. And Mienshao, especially when it gets the buff Brutal Swing, I think it'll be more usable, but it's just as glassy as Breloom, so it'll be kind of a glass cannon that will definitely be fun to use, but I don't think it'll be a top meta. Next up is Draining Kiss being added to a bunch of Pokemon, and Draining Kiss didn't see any buffs, so it's still a terrible move, but kind of like how Dedenne got Parabolic Charge, a year or so ago, I think this is priming a lot of these Pokemon to get this move, so they will buff Draining Kiss in the future, and, obviously that could be next season. Maybe they're testing the waters with them to see where they want to buff it to, but as of now, it's kind of useless. We obviously talked about Rollout Licky Licky, and Spiritomb got Rock Tomb, which is something that we asked way back in our Perfecting Pokemon for Spiritomb, so it's really cool to see that move added, and the Sucker Punch buff obviously helps it out too, but Rock Tomb does still need to be a bit cheaper, or they need to buff its power or something, because the move is still pretty mediocre, but maybe in the future. And next up we have the Brutal Swingers. Galarian Slowbro will like this move over Surf, I think, which is good, especially after that move got reworked. For Tropius, it'll be a nice cheap alternative to Aerial Ace, probably. It'll be risky, like we say with Mienshao. Oranguru will enjoy it for coverage, especially against, other ghost types that might appear. Obviously, Oranguru is a normal type, but, having Brutal Swing will definitely help it out. And Passimian will also like it for coverage, though with counter nerfed, I think that'll not do too much for it. And Runerigus will definitely prefer it to Sand Tomb, and I think Runerigus will be, a strong pick with Shadow Claw, Brutal Swing being cheap, and obviously Shadow Ball. So it'll kind of be like Cofagrigus, who runs a similar Ghost and Dark moveset most of the time. And speaking of ghost types, our final additions come with Nightshade. Obviously we don't know the energy cost of this move, but presumably it'll be a Dark Pulse clone at 50 energy. And this is being distributed to Hisuian Typhlosion, Zorua, Zoroark, and Hisuian Decidueye. Now, I don't really think this will be huge for any of these Pokemon. Zorua and Zoroark are pretty glassy Pokemon, and even Hisuian Typhlosion is too, though it'll still be a nice addition for him. I think Hisuian Decidueye could be interesting with this move. You know, you've got a grass fighting type with a ghost move. That'll be great coverage for it. But yeah, so that just about wraps up all the move updates here. So who do I think is going to be, you know, good in this new meta? Obviously, there's a lot we still need to find out with certain energy costs and, you know, effect chances. From my impressions of this and kind of what we've seen on PvPoke, you know, first simulations of moves in Pokemon, I think you'll have some that will still be good, like Mandibuzz, Feraligatr, Quagsire, Azumarill. They'll all still be good. And there will be some others who will be usable. Annihilate, you know, you'll still be able to use them despite the moves being nerfed. But I think a lot of new Pokemon like Clefable, Machamp, Galarian Weezing, and Guzzlord, they all were pretty good before, but they're now being buffed with, you know, new fancy additions and buffs to their moves. So I think they'll really enjoy the Great and Ultra League, all those Pokemon. And you'll also have some brand new Pokemon to the meta who either were barely good or maybe not good at all. Things like Jumpluff and both Marowak forms, Golurk, Dunsparce, and Dusknoir. You know, most of these, some of them had limited format potential, but now I expect them to be, you know, open league good. And obviously in the Ultra League, there'll be some changes as well. You know, you'll have Pokemon like Charizard with the buffed Fire Spin, less wing attackers. Guzzlord will of course be good. Cresselia a little less good with Future Sight nerfed, but I'm sure it'll still run Moonblast anyway. And in the Master League, many Pokemon will still remain really powerful. It won't be changing as drastically as the lower leagues. But obviously, you'll have Yveltal as a top choice with the buffed Sucker Punch, being a really big threat to Necrozma specifically. And you'll also have things like Groudon, Kyogre, and Landorus all being a bit slower and most likely falling out of favor a bit. But down in the comments below, what are your thoughts on all these big changes? While it's definitely disappointing to have many big investments knocked down, I personally think this was a really necessary change to shake up the meta. Obviously, we may get sick of some of these new picks as time goes on, but I'm pretty optimistic, especially with less bulky picks like Ursaring, Machamp, and Donphan entering the mix. If you like this video and want to see more, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming content. In terms of a proper season update analysis, depending on the impact of the move's energy costs and effect chances, we may do a follow-up video at the beginning of the season, but if not, we'll be sure to put out a community post briefly detailing these stats. Until next time though, thank you so much for watching up to this point, we hope you have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.